The Gulf Coast Growth Show is sponsored by Chevron Pasadena Refinery and is an extension of the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region, where our mission is to market and grow a vibrant regional economy. Hey guys, welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host, Jason Lee, joined with my co-host, Zeke Smith.
So, Jason.
Good to see you today.
You too,
and we are joined by Mr. George Abboud from Exponent Advisors, Smart Group Houston. Excited about this because I've always looked for the opportune time to have our organization out here. So my boss, glad to have you today, George.
Good morning. Good to be here. Thank you, Jason.
And so for our audience today, we're going to talk a lot. So our audience, for those that are listening, is comprised of all the way down to the refineries and the plants, those people that serve those refineries and plants, everything that serves logistics and supply chain in and out of these areas. So we really touch things that are going across the globe, all the way down to the safety place down the street where they're training guys to go into these refineries right over here in beautiful Center Street, Deer Park. So, and this episode is really catered to that privately held business owner that's listening and wondering, hey, maybe it's time to get out of my business, or maybe I should be looking at it, or I'm thinking about exiting. What's going on and what's the value of my company, right? Where would that look like? And the markets have shifted dramatically over the last couple of years, really in the last year. And so we've seen that a lot in our business. And I wanted to invite George, I want to invite you on to talk a little bit about what we're seeing. So before we dive in, George, can you give us a little bit about your background? Tell us a little bit about what kind of qualifies you for this type of stuff.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. I'm an entrepreneur, much like you that are listening. Been on the financial side. I thought that was a good way to enter into it. So studied, got a CPA, started as controller, CFO, moved up in the ranks in finance, but eventually moved into operations. And I have a past of such. And at the time, I thought it was a curse because it's you're in the foxhole. But it's turned out to be a blessing. And I was with a consolidator. And as a whirlwind, we bought 75 privately held businesses. As vice president of operations, I was involved in each of those companies before, during, and possibly after the acquisition went through.
Okay.
So we saw a lot of those transactions. I was on the other side of the table of the choir. So I saw a lot of the headaches and challenges that these business owners went through. And it was a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah. And then about how long ago did you transition from corporate America into this space? And then kind of what led you into it?
Yeah. So it's been about a 2-decade journey of transferring out. And I loved what I did, fixing companies, running them, making them profitable. I think that's what led me to this journey, my entrepreneurial spirit, but also the market opportunity I saw. These business owners were selling their business, obviously, to us.
Right.
And so I saw time and again that even though they had really great counsel, they had attorneys, they had law firms and CPA firms. Some of them had business coaches, but they get to the table and we identified all these red flags.
Right. And
what I mean by red flags is maybe really concerns for the acquisition. Well, at the least, it's a negotiating point to negotiate down the value. If there's concerns and risk, you don't pay as much. And so I was always curious of why didn't they turn those red flags into green, Jason, before they actually got to the table. I was baffled by that time and time again. So I noticed that there's an opportunity is who's helping these business owners maybe identify that their company is really an asset, not just a cash flow stream.
Right.
And if they can understand what the value could be within their time frame and maybe what they can do about it to help incentivize maybe an exit that's a little smoother, maybe maximize their value. And so when I saw this, I was like, well, apparently these guys were being left in the cold, and they're my heroes, right? I'm an entrepreneur myself. And so the initial spirit of our company was born in corporate America, taking advantage of the red flags from the sellers.
Right.
And so that was an inspiration for me to maybe move past that and get on the other side of the table and help create value.
Love it. And so specifically to today's environment, we're in a kind of in a unique environment because I think really over the last few years, for those that are maybe have been close to the finish line, there's just been all this volatility, right? From COVID to just the multitude of things. And now we're dealing with an economic environment, crazy high interest rates. I think business owners are just tired, right? And so for those that are at the end of their rope, they're like, hey, I'm done. Get me out of here. So a couple of years ago, there was free money lying around. It felt like you could get everybody was getting crazy multipliers for the business, but we've been seeing a shift, at least in our industry, of what our owners are seeing. And so I'd love to have you kind of shed some light on kind of how the current economic environment is actually impacting valuations.
Yeah, sure. So without getting too technical, it's really an interesting story because in the last decade, as Jason, as you alluded to, capital was pretty free. It was cheap. Looking back, I took advantage of that in some cases, but I wish I would have done a little bit more.
Yeah. Left some on the table, eh?
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
That's right. But essentially, think about this. There's really two reasons that today's interest rate hikes, which by the way may not be over, has affected business valuation. And these are things that are generally outside of the control of the business owner, right? These are an economic environment. And it's a new situation compared to the last decade. And that is that, the cost of capital is more expensive. If you go out and try to get a loan today, whether it's a mortgage or a business loan, you're going to be shocked compared to 18 months ago, right? So the business acquirers in some capacity are going to have to use some kind of capital to acquire the businesses. Well, it's a lot more expensive for them. So they either have to be more selective or they're maybe temporarily out of the market because they may have to borrow funds or their expectations is higher. And so what we've come to is maybe 3 zones, if you will, for privately held businesses based on the size of their value.
Right.
And you and I were having a conversation earlier about this. Businesses that are going to transition for $5 million and under, they can take advantage of the SBA loans. And that money's still there. That program's working nicely. Maybe the cost is a little higher to borrow, but the money's available. So those deals are getting done, 5 million and below. Those deals are getting done. And then there's the companies that are valued, that are transacting over 15 million. And that's starting to attract the professional buyers,
right?
The investment bankers and maybe some hedge funds. You've got to be over because of the scalability. They have the same cost whether they're doing a $5 million company transaction or maybe a $50 million transaction.
Right.
So it's very expensive to do smaller deals. Anyway, there's a lot of capital on the sidelines based on from the history where we came from. There was a lot of cheap money. That money is ready to be invested. It's still on the sidelines and it needs to be put to use. So it's chasing deals, although they're becoming a little bit more detail oriented,
right?
And maybe their expectations of return needs to be a little higher because their investors' expectations of returns are higher. One reason is you can sit on the couch maybe and get treasury yields at 5% currently.
Right.
So their investors are going to want to make a lot more than 5% if they're going to take some risk.
Right.
Sure.
So there's money available for 15 million and over. But where that leaves us is the no man's land. Businesses are valued between 5 and 15 million. That capital is hard to get.
Right.
And that's become a rough patch currently to get those deals done.
What's the reason specifically?
The reasons for that is because they're outside of the zone of the SBA. So they don't qualify for that free money, or not free money, but available money.
Yeah, sure.
And they're not interested in enough from the big acquirers because they're too small for it to pay off. And so they get left out. And so those generally have to be relied on, maybe some bank notes and some creative financing, and those rates are a lot higher. And so what we're finding is those deals aren't getting done as much. And also the seller may have to take more concessions to get the deal done. They may have to take a larger note back and some other things to make that deal happen.
Not to mention the banks in that space, right? Regional banks, the folks that would typically be handing out a $10 million loan, they've tightened up, right? So the money's not flowing nearly as free.
And that's a word that I wanted to do a follow up to you, George. You said about the SBA loans being out there. They're there, maybe harder to get. So are you seeing that those businesses just have to have a little bit of a tighter ship to go qualify? I mean, just to, things that they did that were maybe loosey goosey. Right. It's like, I can't have paper files anymore. I need to have everything digital or whatever, right?
We partner with individuals that are actually doing all the due diligence and underwriting, although that has been my career in the past. We have some value to the business owner to get them to the table, to help them through it, and then afterwards. But in visiting with these guys, the due diligence process and the underwriting process is a lot more detailed. And so you have to be a lot more buttoned up. You're correct. And so
we had a dinner the other night, and one of our referral partners, he's also a personal client, just a phenomenal relationship of ours. But we send clients both ways, right? People who need to get prepared come our way, and then when they're ready to sell, we send them to him. He's working on a transaction right now. They said that the due diligence request list was 763 items that this buyer was asking for,
just
with supporting documentation.
All right.
Yeah. So just because they're that granular around, hey, if I'm buying it, we better make sure it's buttoned up.
Sounds like a piece of like federal legislation or
Yeah,
something.
there you go. So yeah. So let's talk about this. If I'm in this environment and I'm tired, I'm worn out. What are the options? What things can I consider as a business owner?
Right.
If I am and I'm like, I don't know if I could do another 3 years of this stuff. What should they be considering?
I think that's a really good question. Well, it depends if they're right for selling to a third party.
Okay.
Or if they're going to transition to family members or maybe their management team.
Okay.
Those situations could look a little different. If it's to a third party, you have to remember there are some things that you're going to be subjected to that are beyond your control. Some of the things we just mentioned, right?
Right.
Those are largely based on the current market objectives. By the way, it may not always be this way. There's a lot of talks about the Fed, whether we're on pause, if they're going to do another rate. If there's going to be trouble with the economy, then maybe rates be coming down. So stay tuned for that, basically, right? But in the meantime, there's things that business owners can do. And that is something called company-specific risk. Remember the red flags I was talking about earlier in my history? Business owners can focus on turning those red flags to green.
Right.
And I'll give you a quick analogy. I live out in Katy now. I'm from Katy, but I moved back out there about 5 years ago. And I had an older home, nicer home, but an older home in Cypress. And I was ready to make sure that I capitalized on the massive sales price when I sold in Cypress. Well, because of my experience with red flags and business owners, I said, well, I wonder what red flags my home's going to have. So I went and hired an inspector myself and did my own inspection on my home. I found the red flags. And then what do you think I did, right? I turned them to green. So I hired repairmen, electrician, plumbers. I got it all fixed up and there's no more red flags. Then I went to market to sell the business. And sure enough, inspections were done, passed cleanly. I could show them my inspection report after it was done, and it helped me to have some smooth sailing. So the reason I bring this up is business owners can start working on the same thing for their business right now. Those are the things that are in their control. And we've identified 21 areas of risk that business owners are going to have to go through that affect the value of their business.
Understood.
And so if they're not aware of what those are, they certainly can't be working on fixing them.
Right.
And so one of the things they can do is start fixing their company-specific risk for the reasons we mentioned in my past and for the home analogy. So that's what they can be focusing on, is be aware what those are and make sure that they're turning those red flags into green while the things outside of their control may shift.
Yeah, the way I look at that is using that same analogy, and that is, you might have a business coach, you might have these different people who are, CPAs, all these different folks that you've hired on to help you grow your business, be better at your business. Most successful business owners have recruited third parties to help make sure that they're maximizing their business. Bottom line. And I like to think of those as subcontractors. They're doing subcontractual work for that business owner to grow the value.
Right.
What you just described is essentially that inspection report.
Yes.
It's that inspection report that then says, now let me get with my subcontractors.
That's right.
And let's go grow these things. And so one of the things that I've seen in the past is a lot of times business owners can be working on a lot of really important things. And I guess the difference is between it can help you be successful, but it might not translate to significance when it comes time to sell that company. And so the difference being is, hey, this is really helping me grow my business, but is it actually impacting the value?
That's right.
And so maybe that might help you move around your big rocks, right?
Yeah, I think it's crucial. We just had two businesses. There are such things as serial entrepreneurs. If you're listening, you know who you are. But a lot of times it's a life work.
Right.
So we just had two clients. One of them has been in almost 50 years in business, and they did cross the finish line just recently, very successfully, but they only did it once. And then we have a client that's been doing it for 40 years as business, and he's crossing the finish line currently. The reason I bring this up is you only have one shot at this for those people. You spent 40 years on this business, and there's only one transaction date when you sell.
That's right.
And so it seems to me that you want to be prepared for that, and you want to maximize that scenario. And my point is, you're not selling 15, 16, 25 companies. You're selling one.
Right.
And so if you go at it alone, you're going to learn all the mistakes there are to learn in that one transaction, which again may affect your value. So why would you do that? If you're a serial entrepreneur, you start to gain some momentum and some education and some thought processes. But if you're going at it one time, you have to make sure that you have the right counsel at the table to maximize the scenario and be educated about it before you even get to the table.
Right. And then, another question that when you're talking about education, right, and knowing what to do, One of the things that you mentioned earlier was this impact that deals might have to be more creative, right? I mean, by creative, a lot of times that means earnouts and certain things that you have to be prepared to perhaps stay on longer.
That's right.
Maybe you're getting less money up front, or so
There's
especially in that kind of there's concessions and these things that you got to be prepared to make. And I think a lot of times it could be a risk walking into that situation, because what I've observed in the past, even with people that aren't even our clients, but when they've come to us and said, "Hey, this is the experience that I've had," or the first time that I was approached with this, perhaps we see the second half of that apple, or the second bite of that apple, isn't always rosy.
That's correct.
There's a lot of risk that you inherently have to take on. Correct? Tell us about some of these earnout processes, some of the obstacles.
So I think that the first thing is it could be really infinite, and some of it could be that they're going to take a note back where immediately they sell all the equity of the business. They no longer have a vote, no say, but maybe they have to take a note back for some of it, right? And so there's some risk and discussions about that. They're going to be a creditor now without control. They're going to be earning interest and a higher interest rate, which is great, but that's only good if the creditor can pay the note.
Right.
So you have to understand the cash flows, and when you're doing modeling and future growth, because if the company's really going to grow afterwards, that takes a lot of capital. Mm-hmm. There's also, if they're profitable, that's going to go to income taxes, which also diminishes the cash flow, and then they have to have enough cash to pay the seller. And so will that all fit in that model is important to know. I find that they just cross their fingers a lot of times, but there are processes that you can run with these projections to try to determine if there's enough cash flow and how at risk you would be in taking that note back, for one.
Right.
Second one is that they may have to roll equity into the new company. Well, they're rolling equity in the new company, but are they going to have a seat at the board? Are they going to have any influence? What does that look like? And projections, it's always rosy. I met with one of our clients that they're expecting the amount that was rolled into equity in the new company in 4 years will be worth 4 times multiple. Well, Is that going to happen? I don't know, right? Sure. And so, but the point I'm saying, and that all of these different scenarios, how will it affect the business owner that's selling personally? How will it affect him? Does he need that equity roll over to be successful in order to do the things he wants to do in retirement or the next entrepreneurial journey or his legacy? That is also knowledge that back in my history that I discovered that these business owners didn't really do any great financial planning. They didn't really understand the tax events. They didn't understand the cash flow. And then all the expenses they used to run through the business, that's all going to be on their dime. And how all that affects their personal finances as it relates to cash flow, net worth, legacy, and significance.
Right.
So there's things you can do to plan for that, Jason. You know that we offer those services, but we're not the only ones, for them to have a great education of that process before they get there.
Right.
And so another thing is, I would just say emotionally, business owners have strong will.
Right.
Majority of them are a unique breed. I'm one of those. But can they emotionally be still part of a company when they're no longer running it, making the major decisions? And that is often underestimated.
So we've talked a lot about transactional information. I'm interested in some trends analysis, because what I'm hearing, well, first of all, I'm not a business owner, but I think I was going to ask you, what do I do? I'm tired, and am I going to make it in 3 years? Maybe you give me some advice on that. And I'm not a business owner. I'm just really wore out. What I'm hearing is planning is important. This is a long process. Mm-hmm. So as a business owner, you need to be very reflective, right? Meditative even, and say, what's my risk tolerance now based on the climate, right? So you've got to say, I'm tired, but maybe I need to give this thing a couple of years to really get my house in order, to use your terms, to talk to some folks, to come to Exponent, or just start those conversations, because this isn't something that's going to happen fast.
Correct.
If it's done correctly. I'm sure it can, right? Fire sale, whatever, but to do it the right way, George, what I'm hearing is plan on it taking some time, try not to do it alone.
Correct.
Use some advisors, but it's going to be a process if you want to do it correctly. So with that, all that backstory, give me your analysis of our pending political climate and how, if you're in for the long haul and you're planning it one way, and we have a complete shift in that environment, how do you, combat or plan or prepare for something like that when you're thinking now, hey, this is a 1 to 2 year process, and in a year from now, we're going to have a could have a complete political shift here.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
An
So that's a
economic
very
shift.
interesting topic, and there's a lot of studies on this, a lot of history. Broadly, this is what I would say. This isn't the first political election we're going to have, right?
Not the last. hopefully.
It's not the last, but it does create a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty creates stalemates, and stalemates creates maybe market conditions that aren't right for seller to exit during that time. Historically, there has been a lot of concern, a lot of unknowns, and a lot of risk that really puts this market on pause. And that's coming. It'll probably be the same again because you just really don't know. Economically, there could be broad range impacts. In the market, we see that there will be brief temporary impacts from these elections, but overall, it's a non-event, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I think that obviously that there's exceptions to that. If there's major change in certain industries and you're operating in that industry and there's compliance changes or regulation changes or tax changes or credit changes, that may affect your industry greater, right?
Sure.
Those are hard to plan for, but you need to plan for a range of possibilities is what I say. A range of possibilities. You understand if it goes the wrong way or if it's more advantageous.
So plan for Texas weather.
Yeah.
Plan for Texas weather. Amen.
That's right.
Yeah.
None of us control or can project the future, but you can be ready through knowledge for a range of possibilities is what I would say. And so that's their greatest.
I think that's
asset.
an awesome point just to highlight and just pause on is like to tell a business owner, hey, be great at something. You're a great owner, you're a great business, but be prepared for all scenarios could be your greatest strength, right? Just to be prepared to absorb anything that comes at you and react appropriately, swiftly, efficiently. I think that is such a great point for business owners I think we train so hard to do outbound work and be great at this.
Right.
And then something comes like a pandemic or something crazy happens, then, out of left field and you're like, whoa, and our business shuts down. So that preparedness
I'll tell you this,
point.
it's great. I'm part of a business forum, if you will. And these guys are a little crazy because when we have tough times, we roll up our sleeves and they say, okay, how can we take advantage of this current marketplace?
Right.
Instead of like putting your head in the sand or woe's me, the sky's falling, which you have to be prepared for, bolster for that. But we're having other conversations like now that we're in the situation or the situation that may be coming, how can we take advantage of that scenario?
Because someone is.
That's
If
right.
not you,
Great
someone
way of
is.
thinking, right?
Yeah.
So last question, and then I want to give you a minute just to wrap up with any final words. But so we've talked a lot about the markets, what it would look like to a third party. What if I'm still thinking about getting out, but maybe the third party isn't the best option? What do I need to be considering if I am looking to perhaps transition to my team?
Good question. So we talked about that no man's land value of a business between 5 and 15 million. If they're a service company, it may be even tougher to sell. Number one, there's no capital available. There's not a lot of certainty. You don't have long-term contracts. You can't just count on money coming in. Cash flow has to be earned, generally bid by bid or reputation. Phones ring. Salespeople are going out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are harder to transact. If you're interested in transition to a management team, there are a lot of things to consider. Time may be one of those. Generally, your key personnel that are helping you drive your company on that range, 5 to 15 million, they're not billionaires.
Right.
They're hardworking individuals that are trying to make their way, and they haven't cut their teeth as it relates to their net worth, perhaps.
Right.
So they may not have the finances to buy the business owner out at that time in that range.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be some time needed. One of the things that we found that could be highly motivational and highly successful is it possible to have some tax strategies that saves cash that would have gone to the IRS, and then maybe you direct it and funnel it to a plan that motivates and retains these executives longer term.
Understood.
And what's interesting, Jason, is is that pool of profit, if they're actually generating profits for the business and they're helping produce success, that pool of capital in a tax advantaged way can maybe be used to buy out the business owner.
Right.
And so I always like to say win-win lose. And IRS, if you're listening, my apologies, but the win is
They're not up
Yeah.
or at work yet. It's way too early in the morning, George, for them.
Well, I like to say we want the business owner to win, right? It's his business. He's realizing that there's an asset value. He wants to transition this. He wants to go to this next phase. But we want there to be a win for the next generation. As they take the reins of this business, we don't want them to be strapped so much that they have too much weight and they can't make the transition
Right.
successful. So there's the win-win. I don't really quite mind if it's a win-win-lose when the IRS doesn't get to participate quite as much. And so what if we could help take some of those tax dollars, inspire this transaction, and help spur the economy?
There you go.
Love it.
Yeah, I think it's putting them in the position where they actually can see something tangible. That, a lot of times people talk about phantom stock, phantom this, but that to me says, well, if I do all this stuff and nothing in the world changes, but if I leave or whatever, I have nothing. But it's putting something in place where they literally are saying, okay, if I do this, I've got this much money, and then later on down the road, I can pledge that money.
Yeah.
Get some financial support maybe from the SBA along with this, and then come to you and buy out over time.
I mean, as you both know, I've heard this your company pitch on this angle. I think it is absolutely brilliant,
right.
and I wish, I mean, whether it's you or somebody else, like more companies should take advantage of that. I mean, I'm the HR guy in the room, right? So I'm all about retention and employee empowerment and long-term leadership growth. Yeah. So I think if you can, and the rub is always the CFO's like, we can't afford to do all those programs and keep those people and bonus them and keep giving them raises. Okay. So let's talk about a different angle. Let's get creative in our deal making here, right? So, and quick follow-up, because you said it. You said transition to next generation. Trend question. Are you seeing companies transition to family members less now? Because I'm starting to hear that. A lot of owners are like, my kids don't want it. They don't want the business. I'm going to go somewhere else. I just want to.
I can't speak to whether it's happening less, but I can speak to my experience in that, which I have quite a bit in that range. I think that the assumption generally is that this has been I'm the business owner speaking. This has been my life's work. This has been my life. It's my passion. I'm so proud of this business. I'm reluctant to depart with it through this transition, but at least I can have my family, kids, carry the reins.
I thought you were going to say, I don't want to give it to these idiot kids of mine. I got somebody else that can handle the business.
Well, I mean, that's something that you're going to see all types. But in this scenario, they're making an assumption that it's going to be just as much of a joy or success for the next generation as it was for them. And so they're really thinking about doing a favor for their children. But sometimes the reverse is true. They may not have the skill sets.
Yeah.
They may not have the personality or the profile, or they may not have the grit. Not everybody's designed to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
But also they may not have the interest. They may have skill set somewhere else. Yeah. And so it's hard enough to be a business owner, but it's harder if you don't have the passion.
Right.
And so that's why a lot of companies fail in their generational transition. So that has to be discovered.
You showed us, I think, some information on every generation, the percentage of success of a company goes, dramatically down. I think you brought that to us, George. That was incredible. Like the third generation was like 2% of companies make it or something. It was something.
It's crazy.
And we have some in the city that's fourth generation, and I've learned a lot from visiting with them. Yeah. But they're definitely doing something different.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Got to.
But so that's it. And also they may not be qualified. Another thing too is that a lot of times the reason the business owner is good at what he's doing by now is because he's failed for 30 years at it.
That's right.
That's a lot of experience of knowing what not to do.
Right.
And then getting on the right path. If it's handed to a younger individual that doesn't have the passion and they're prepared for the next 30 years of mistakes, perhaps, it may not be a good formula.
Yeah. You got to be bought in.
You bat 300 and make the Hall of Fame.
There you
go. Right. So,
George, we got to wrap up. So is there anything else that you want to wrap up with? Anything that you feel like?
I just think the overshadowing theme here is knowledge is power, right? And so business owners, as everybody knows, especially listening, goes by a lot of times by their gut. But the gut didn't just develop out of thin air. They didn't wake up, right? A lot of it's through their experiences, known or unknown. Right. And that's knowledge. So I would say that the best asset a business owners can do is to harness that same spirit to go by your gut. But what if you could gain more knowledge to make those decisions? A lot of times business owners don't have the expertise other than what they're doing that's fantastic in the marketplace. They may have a craft or a niche, and they know that, again, from the history and what they're doing and their passion. But there's a lot of things that may help in this space that they're just not familiar with. And so what I would say is, what if they could team up with someone that would help put them in the driver's seat to make these decisions? And that is a comforting feeling, because if you're out there having to make decisions and you're not qualified, but you still have to make them, that creates a lot of anxiety. So if you can partner with someone to gain that knowledge, to put you in the driver's seat, then to start making those decisions that you feel confident about, maybe range of possibilities for those outputs.
Yeah, I think take the
Fantastic.
emotions out of it. You said that word. Take
Yeah.
somebody that can look at your business objectively, and you have a lot of emotion, passion. Use
Right.
that word. Take that out and say you're allowed to have emotions about your baby
Right.
here, but let me help you and be
Right.
more of an objective consultant partner here.
And you may not get paid for it. You may
Right.
not get paid for your passion.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
That's
We want to
for
help you get paid.
That's right. I love it.
Great stuff, George.
Yeah, man. Thanks, George.
Thank you,
Huge
guys.
value add. I know we talked about this at that event a couple weeks ago, and I felt like I needed to get this on the show. So I'm glad we were able to finally.
Yeah, you get to
on.
keep your job
6
one more
years
year.
later, man.
One more year.
Yeah.
You get to stay on.
So again, as always, guys, our audience is built for such a really just for this community, but also the people that serve it, right? And privately held business owners are a big part of that. So the show is really kind of catered to those individuals. And like we always call to action, we would encourage if you or somebody you know needs to, or you already heard this. So if you know somebody who needs to hear this, we would encourage you to pay it forward and put this in their hands.
Deep thinking right there,
Yeah,
Jason.
there you go.
Nice job.
Exactly. I'm a pretty sharp guy. Normally, I would encourage you guys to reach out to George directly, but considering I'm in charge of sales for him, I would tell you reach out to me.
Shameless
I'm
plug.
happy to plug you in, George, and get you connected with him. If you have any questions, that's my job. So would love it if you guys could do that. And then at the same time, always for Zeke and myself, if you have feedback for the show, guests, people that should need to come on, please communicate to us. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. And to get plugged in, and if it's your first time listening and you want to listen more regularly, go to Economic Alliance HoustonPortRegion.com for our website and go to media, and then you can subscribe right there.
I remember my first podcast.
Yeah. Yikes. All right. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for tuning in. And be sure to go to the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region website and subscribe to our channels. And let's pay it forward by sharing the good news of what's happening in our region by passing this episode to somebody you know.